Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. All right, in the midst of this miserable 2-12 New York Giants season, I was reminded the other day that during the summer I had a conversation with Ty Dunn of the fantastic subscription site golongtd.com, and he and I were actually optimistic about the 2024 NFL New York Giants. And so I thought I would invite Ty back on the show so that he and I could try to explain ourselves and see how it is that we got this so wrong. So Ty, how are you? And 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 how did we get this so wrong?
That's a great question, Ed. I had around it. I think there's a lot of reasons, but as always in professional football, number one, it's the quarterback. It's the quarterback. If you look throughout the NFL, if you were to, I know the example would be extreme here in Western New York, but if you were to extract Josh Allen from the Buffalo Bills, um, they'd they'd be a 6-win team, right? I mean, a quarterback can swing things violently one way or the other. So obviously the gross miscalculation by Joe Shane, Brian Dable, everybody there running the New York Giants was that Daniel Jones could elevate this team into contention. And I'm sure we'll get into everything. If you really do take it play by play, 22 to 23 to 24, I follow the logic. I get it, right? Like you won a playoff game with this quarterback when Isaiah Hodgins is his number one, and he's just getting used to this really complex offense. And you saw what Brian Dable did with Josh Allen. Like, I get the contract and the belief in doubling down with the 2-year escape hatch, all of that. But in the end, he is what he is. I mean, you're trying to see something
Yeah,
that frankly just is not there. And
yeah,
I'm sure you vacillated just like me, Ed. I mean, here I go along.
and
I think I've written so much in Daniel Jones, going back and forth. Like 1 minute you think this guy is clearly a C minus to C plus quarterback. He will only take you so far, but you can talk yourself into him for X, Y, and Z as well.
yeah, and it's interesting because you go back to 2022, and I get it. I have asked Joe this question. I have asked Joe um when he signed Daniel to the 2-year contract. I asked him, flat out. I said, "Did you think you would be here a year later with Daniel Jones, signing him to a deal?" And he was honest. He said, "No." He said, "If I had known that he would do what he did, I would have used the 5th year option," which, let's be honest, he made the right decision when he came on board not to pick up that 5th year option. You don't pick up a 5th year option with a guy sight unseen that you've never worked with before and tie yourself to the guy for another year. I mean, he thought clearly, and Brian Daboll thought clearly that they would be moving on from Daniel Jones after 2022. And then 2022 happened, and you couldn't move on. And I have said this multiple times, and just I'm curious if you agree with me. I do not think that the New York Giants had any other choice after 2022, knowing how John Mara felt about Daniel Jones and knowing what happened in 2022. I don't think they had any other choice but to give Daniel Jones some type of contract, and I thought Joe Shane did the best that he could to get out of that, to get a contract with a 2-year escape hatch. I don't think they had another choice. I really don't.
I totally agree. Totally agree, Ed. I mean, I wrote a story at Go Long, the case for Joe Shane. So Even if you think this guy should be gone and everybody should be fired and you just want to hate Reed, head on over to golongtd.com. I try to spell this all out because when you really do take it season to season, decision to decision, let's go to that point, Ed, because you're right.
Right.
At that point, with his performance, you know, throwing, running, winning with less than ideal circumstances all around him, you had to get something done. Now, I was told, I'm going to pull it up so I don't misspeak here. Like, so, the GM's fear is every GM's fear at this point. You don't want to pay a quarterback so much money that you can't put pieces around him. And I was told that the Giants offered Saquon Barkley 13 mil a year at that point, that offseason, when they're both free agents. And let's remember, he's making 12.58 mil per year in Philly. So if you do that, all right, then you're able to apply that franchise tag to Daniel Jones. You maintain some flexibility if things do go south. But Saquon's camp just wasn't having it. Like I was
Right.
told that he was asking for 17 million per year. They thought that
Mhm.
he was better than Christian McCaffrey. I'm sure a lot of people know this stuff. But I mean, that the,
Yep.
the plan I think for the Giants was extend Saquon, like maximize this window that he
Right.
has at his age, playing the way he's playing, and do just 1 year with Daniel Jones,
Right,
right?
there's
And instead,
there's
they weren't having it.
yeah, there is an impression out there that Joe Shane chose Daniel Jones over Saquon Barkley. And I think you are 100% right because this is also my understanding. The Giants wanted to extend Saquon Barkley. They went to Barkley
100%.
before they went to Daniel Jones. They did not pivot to signing Daniel Jones to the multi-year contract until Saquon Barkley made it clear that he wasn't signing for the number that the Giants were interested in giving to him, which, as you said very interestingly, is basically the same contract he now has in Philly with a few $1,000,000 extra with a few in guaranteed money. I think, maybe 19 versus the 26 that he's got in Philly. So they didn't choose Jones over Barkley. Barkley said no, and they realized they had to get a long-term deal signed with one of these guys, so they pivoted to Daniel Jones.
And let's remember that draft too, because that's the downside of winning. I mean, really, it's crazy looking back. All of those wins and how
Right.
it all backfired in so many ways. Because really, if you can go back in time, you would trade Saquon Barkley at the deadline, get something for him also. But you win games to the point where now you're picking toward the end of the first round, 25th overall, out of range of Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson. I mean, I don't think you really want Will Levis there.
No, Will
And that
Levis was the option, and that, as we're seeing in Tennessee, that's not good.
and the thing is, like, we always compare everything to Buffalo, and yes, the Bills, they did win unexpectedly with Tyrod Taylor, year one under Sean McDermott. And then they were able to trade up for Josh Allen the next year. But the only reason they were able to trade up for Josh Allen and they get Tremaine Edwards in that first round too is because you had that extra first round pick in your back pocket because you traded out of the Patrick Mahomes pick. You could have taken
Right,
Mahomes, you deal down. So the Giants didn't have that draft capital to really move all over the place, do different things. I mean, you can argue a lot of
there's
things, right? There's that draft before it, but still, at
right,
that point, to your point, you had to get something done with Daniel Jones short term. And so the middle ground was this, looks terrible, right? In the headlines, 4 years, 160 million. But they knew it was a 2 year deal all along.
right. It's one of those things I've also said. Dan Hatman, who is the director of the Scouting Academy, um, has told me for years there's a certain amount of luck involved in all of this. There's a certain amount of timing involved in all of this. And even in that, heading into that, that off season with Daniel Jones, who was the other option? What else were the Giants going to do? And you've also got you go all the way back to Eli Manning. They would have drafted Justin Herbert, but Justin Herbert went back to school. And then the next year when Herbert came out, the Giants again had a chance at Justin Herbert, but they had already taken Daniel Jones, so they weren't going to double down on that. Um, the timing has just been the timing has just never seemed to work right for the Giants. And even this coming off season, where they have almost backed themselves into a corner of having to take a quarterback. You're looking at guys in Shadur Sanders and Cam Ward who would be like QB5 and QB6 in last year's class. So, maybe you can make that work, but the timing's just been awful for the Giants.
I haven't really been. I'm not much of a draft Nick in the heat of the NFL season. Are they really that blah, Ed? I mean, from what you've seen, what you've heard.
That is what and I haven't studied them in great depth either, but, covering the Giants, you hear their names every single day now. And that is what you hear. You hear if Shadur Sanders, whichever one is QB1 in this class, is considered by Dane Brugler, by most of the top draft guys, if you plunked him into last year's class, is QB4 or QB5, which doesn't mean you
Okay.
can't take him in the first round. It just means that that the Jaden Daniels, the sure thing Jaden Daniels isn't there. So, and if you're the Giants, you may still have to take that swing. It is what it is. It's the situation that they've put themselves in. But as you going back to what we talked about initially, quarterback. We mentioned it. Somebody mentioned it to Brian Dable on Sunday night after the loss to Baltimore. Just how important the quarterback position is. If you look at it, Giants are 2-12, and I've said this multiple times with better quarterback play. And Daniel Jones played efficiently at times this year. Not great, not over the top. He wasn't prolific, but there were times when he was efficient. He completed a high number of passes. He didn't turn the ball over a lot. What he didn't do was make plays at the end of games that made a difference. You can make an argument that at 2-12, with better quarterback play between Jones and Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito and whoever, that the Giants are 6-6, and we're not arguing about Shane and Daboll and their future. That's just at least to me anyway. You can make that argument.
No, I mean, I've tried to watch every second of the Giants this year, and it's a maddening experience. I can't imagine being a Giants fan when you see the kicker who, I mean, I'm not a doctor. I don't really know how things are connected, but the guy was drilling. Graham Gano's drilling kicks from 50 plus in pregame. I mean, he's good to go. He's a veteran. He knows his body. And the groin, the hamstring. I know that was a hot button issue right at the top of the season. Right, boom, game two. You're the first team in NFL history to score 3 touchdowns, allow none, and
And lose a
lose,
game.
that's insane.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
insane.
Mhm.
So, whether it's that, whether it's, I'm thinking of they've just lost in this in crushing fashion. I mean, in that same game, Malik Neighbors, he drops a 4th down. You catch
Right.
that, you're gonna win the game.
Yep.
The Bengals game, a 56-yarder to Darius Slayton's called back. That just sucked the life out of the team. Then down goes Andrew Thomas. I
And
mean, you can
you
really
throw an interception. You're down 3 points, and you throw an interception out the back of the end. You're trying to throw the ball away out the back of the end zone for some god awful reason instead of just throwing the ball in the dirt. And you get hit, and you throw an interception, and it's that kind of stuff. But that's
Pittsburgh,
that's the kind of year
illegal
that it's
shift.
been. Yes, illegal shift and and a 6-year veteran quarterback forgetting to set a protection,
Yeah.
you know? So
Eh,
it's insane.
That's kind of my point too. It's like all of this stuff is gonna happen. It's the NFL. Like you should expect dropped passes. I mean, Wandell Robinson had a huge drop against Dallas early in the year. You like this it's gonna happen. There's gonna be a lot of muck, a lot of mistakes, a lot of bad calls, and you've just got to have a quarterback who can rise above it. And Daniel
Mhm,
Jones never could. But what's interesting, I think, is like you see a lot of promise in Daniel Jones in 2022. You see enough to run it back. There's some belief there in the quarterback, in the coaching, and I look. I was told that within that building that something kind of changed in Daniel Jones. Like you, you hear that he's kind of complaining about that contract to teammates in the locker room, like, "Oh yeah, it's really a 2-year deal." Well, shit, man, that's a lot of money for 2 years. 80 mil for 2 years. I think a lot
mhm,
of quarterbacks would be pretty happy about that. Now, I sat down with Daniel Jones this training camp. He clearly was upset about the hard knocks stuff
mhm,
and the fact that the Giants were thinking about drafting a quarterback. That bothered him. Take it all the way back to them not picking up the 5th year option. That bothered him. So, but I don't know. I feel like after he signed the contract, maybe they think something might have changed in him, and at the end of the day, he just didn't have it. Like,
right,
I think the quote was, this is from somebody in the know there with the team. Wires get crossed. He just doesn't see the field well. Described as very cerebral, but an overthinker. Like, and that's what it is. He's gonna say everything you want him to say at a podium. He's gonna take the bullets. He can handle the New York market. He's athletic. At one point, he had a strong enough arm, it seemed. You can talk yourself into Daniel Jones, but in the end, the contract stuff mentally weighed on him to some degree, changed him to some degree. And then as a player, that split second, he couldn't make that decision in that split second to spit the ball out, hit somebody. It's the receiver almost had to be open, and then he throws
mhm,
it. There's that
right,
play against Pittsburgh that Troy Aikman pointed out where he's like, "Look, just get the ball out right here to Slayton, boom," and he hits it in stride. And said he waits, he throws it, it's too late, and you just saw that out of Daniel Jones too much.
right. And the question becomes now at 2 and 12, you've got planes flying over the stadium, begging John Mara for change for the which hasn't happened since 1978. You've got fans wearing paper bags over their heads, which they're not doing that the entire game. These guys are doing it at the end of games. They're doing it at the end of games, hoping to get their pictures taken, which is exactly what's happening. And, but it's happening. And you've got that stadium on Sunday, against the Ravens. That stadium was lifeless. And if it was 2/3 full, that might be generous. Um, so, I have wrote 2 or 3 weeks ago, I wrote making the case for why, Joe Shane and Brian Daboll should stay and why they should be given the opportunity, to draft their own quarterback and see where that goes. And I know you wrote the same type of thing, a week or so ago, but I'm also aware that there's another side to that argument. And the other side to that argument is the other side of that argument is Caleb Williams and what's going on in Chicago, Bryce Young and what's going on in Carolina, where they fired their coach and GM in the middle of his first season. Not to mention the Daniel Jones era in New York, where they had three head coaches, two GMs, and what, five offensive coordinators in Jones's tenure as four or five offensive coordinators. So, and I know you're a Brian Daboll fan. So, are you are you sticking with your belief that the Giants should stay with those two guys?
Absolutely. Absolutely, and it's ugly as hell. I'm not going to run from that. It's very difficult to watch the New York Giants try to play offensive football. It's offensive. And then, everybody deals with injuries, and granted they've had more injuries than most, but the fact that everything just kind of self-destructs when you lose your left tackle, it's damning. Look, you can't sugarcoat it. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if John Mara and the Giants decided to go a new direction, and I'm sure you see the same feedback I do tenfold.
Mhm.
A
Right,
lot of Giant fans are ready to move on. Like,
right.
they want to see
They
a
just
new
wanna win,
regime. Just wanna
right? They
win.
just wanna win.
I'll say this, though,
It's
I
Go ahead.
think that, yeah, like, seeing it, I mean, we can beat the dead horse over and over, but it is true, like, here in Buffalo, where the Bills were in 2016, 2017, a whole generation before that, and then what they became, the entire pivot is Josh Allen. Two driving forces behind Josh Allen's ascent are the two people running the New York Giants right now. I've talked to both. I've talked to people around both, like, because that's always the question. Like, what did Joe Shane really do? What did Brian Dable really do? And you could say, well, no, the fact that Josh Allen's the MVP of the league is an indictment of Brian Dable. I'm telling you, like, when the Bills drafted Josh Allen, it was unbelievably unpopular here locally. I had a buddy that worked at WGR, the local radio station. Uh, the entire pre-draft process, he said, "I'm going to quit my job if they draft Josh Allen." To his credit, he did. He quit his job,
Wow.
and I had friends that were like at the Bills draft party in the field house. Like, when they took Josh Allen, there were jeers, there were boos. I mean, you go back to the tweet when they selected him and look at the replies. I'm sure a lot of people are scrubbing that up at this point, but it was unpopular. They wanted Josh Rosen, so it took a next level of conviction and belief in this unbelievably raw talent from Wyoming, who had a lot of really ugly moments in college. To take him over Josh Rosen at that point. Joe Shane is Brandon Beane's right hand man. They did a ton of work. They went through the entire process that Joe Shane is doing right now with the New York Giants, scouting all of these guys. I mean, this is a GM. I just have a lot of respect for these GMs who grew up a true scout, living out of Marriott's. You're missing family birthdays and youth football championships, but he's a scouts GM. Gettleman kind of got away from that toward the end, and I think got a little distant and didn't really understand that life that a Joe Shane understands what his scouts are going through. So and the next conversation would be Brian Dable, everything that he did day to day with Josh Allen. I mean, I've had players tell me, veteran players say that would have been Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes. That would have been Bill Belichick, Tom Brady. That if Brian Dable and Josh Allen are together, they're winning multiple Super Bowls. It was a special relationship on the field, off the field. I think their personalities just matched beautifully. The personalities of Dable and Daniel Jones never really matched. I mean, we all see Dable on TV. Like, that's who he is. He's fiery. He's gonna curse. His emotions are gonna be on his sleeve. Daniel Jones is very stoic, very stern, very serious. Like, Josh Allen's, treating the field like it's his backyard. So, and look, and that's a black eye on the Giants for not realizing that and still going through with that for 3 years too. My point is, like, John Mara, he owes it to himself to allow these two to mine this quarterback field. And like you just said, maybe it's not that great. But who knows? They might love somebody in this class. There could
But
be a stud in
you
this
do
class.
have probably at worst a top 3 pick. So you
You're going to
should
have the
be
opportunity.
right. Um,
You owe them the chance to draft their own quarterback. I truly
that
believe that, because that's why you hired him in the first place.
I I feel the same way mostly, and I felt on Monday at Big Blue View, I did making the case for why the Giants, should or would consider moving on. And I felt the obligation to write the other side of the story as well. Um, and I think that, that case really is being fair to the next guy, because we saw what happened with Daniel Jones with all the changeover. We're seeing what's happening with Caleb Williams. We've seen, Bryce Young be put through it. Um, there's a case to be made that if you're starting clean at quarterback, you, me, and the mailman, if you've got the first or second pick in the class, We can pick between Shadur Sanders and Cam Ward too, and one of us is probably going to be right and one of us is going to be wrong. But that pick is not hard to make, really.
Yeah.
You're going to take one of those two guys. The question is getting it right and putting them in the right situation once you make that pick. So I tend to agree with you, but I can see the other side of why they wouldn't do it as well. And it's just it's a hard situation if you're John Mara and Steve Tisch, especially when when people are hiring planes and telling you what to do. I wouldn't want to be Mara today.
It wouldn't be unprecedented. I think there are really good general managers in the NFL who have completely whiffed at quarterback. Worse than the Giants have whiffed here. And I kind of touched
Well,
on some of this in the column, but like, I mean, Jason Light took Jameis Winston number one. Andrew Barry traded all of those first round picks and handed Deshaun Watson what 230 million guaranteed. Even Howie Roseman, considered the best GM in football by most. I mean, that Carson Wentz contract really
right.
bad. What about Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch trading three
Yep.
first round picks for Trey Lance, who's probably shouldn't even be on a roster at this point?
Yeah.
Nick Casario. I mean, they had two brutal seasons with David Culley and Lovey Smith, and they draft CJ Stroud, Will Anderson Jr. Everything changes. I mean, the NFL, things can change like that.
Right.
And they're going to be in a position where, like you said, they got the high pick. Maybe one of those quarterbacks turns out to be a star, but also you have a lot of money. I'm sure you got the number at the tip of your tongue, like cap wise, will be in healthy shape. And you can
Right.
talk yourself into a few foundational pieces that they do
Right.
have on the heels of a really good draft. So there is a sunny side up scenario. I'm thinking John
Right.
Mara in trying to sell this regime to the fan base. I mean, you can flesh it out here as
Right.
bad as things are right
You
now with those
can.
planes
Yes,
flying above.
yes, you can, especially after a really good 2024 draft class. And I think, in your piece, in your making the case piece for Joe and Dave's, I know you mentioned a couple of GMs, like you had just talked about who had a rough go at the beginning of their tenures and who eventually found the right coach, eventually found the right quarterback. One that comes to mind is Les Snead with the Rams, who had a few years with Jeff Fisher where they were 500 or worse, where they just weren't good. As you said, Nick Casario. But then, Snead finds Sean McVay, and Sean McVay finds Jared Goff, and then turns Jared Goff into Matt Stafford. And that's worked out pretty well. And I remind Giants fans that it goes back a long way. But they hired George Young in 1979. George Young didn't get the Giants to the playoffs until I think 1984. And then they win 2 Super Bowls after that. So that that's possible. But what I wanted to ask you, I'm thinking about Daboll, and I know you're a Daboll guy. I am struggling to think of a head coach who has had such a rough go at the beginning. I mean, he has, when you look at it, even after making the playoffs in 2022, there are only 2 head coaches with the Giants that have a worse career winning percentage. We're talking about Bill Arnsparger and Pat Shermer. He had Brian Daboll has a worse winning percentage at this point than Joe Judge did. And I'm struggling to come up with examples of head coaches who have struggled to that degree and yet, given time and given patience, have turned it around and become, very successful head coaches, other than maybe a guy that started with an expansion team. So I don't know if you can think of any or off the top of your head who might have turned it around after a couple of years like this.
It's hard
Right.
because even in Buffalo, I mean, similar to the Giants, like we got into earlier, you make the playoffs when nobody expects you to make the playoffs. But that was the big difference is the Bills were willing to take that step backward to try to take a few steps forward. That first year, Josh Allen, they're 6-10, and then they catch lightning in a bottle. Playoffs, trade for Stephon Diggs, everything kind of takes off from there. I mean, it's bad. Like let's be
Mhm.
real. Off of a bye week, you lose 30-7 to Tampa Bay, and you look lifeless. The Thanksgiving Day game against the Cowboys. I mean, Cooper Rush is the quarterback. CeeDee Lamb plays a half, and it's an odyssey to cross the
Mhm.
ball across midfield. Most games, it's an odyssey to cross the ball. I mean, I get it. It's historically the numbers tell you how offensive this offense really is. So I don't think it would surprise Dable himself if they moved on. Like
Mhm.
it's hard to
I
justify when you see what's happening on Sunday. Yeah,
I've said before, I think the hard decision for ownership is to stay with these guys. I actually think that's the hard decision to make. The easy decision to make is to throw them to the wolves, give the fan base their pound of flesh, and start over again.
exactly. You know what's crazy too? It's like if he was a worse coach, if Brian Dable was a worse coach, and they don't win 3 games with Tommy DeVito last year, then they draft Jaden Daniels. It's a
Yeah,
totally different story.
yeah,
Like the NFL
yep.
is so fickle like that. Really, it's not exaggerating to say like you lose to Green Bay on that Monday night, or who else they beat? New England and
Mhm.
Washington, whatever it was. You get Daniels. He's a singularly
And
exceptional talent,
and
and
maybe
maybe
you're
with the right,
right, maybe you're Washington instead of, this year instead of where the Commanders are.
yeah,
Yeah.
that relationship matters more than anything in all of sports. The head coach and the quarterback, and I just keep coming back to that point. Like you hired this GM and this head coach because of their knowledge and expertise and sixth sense at the quarterback position. All right, so give them a chance to find their guy, and it's just on ownership to figure out. Okay, like did they already have that chance? Like did they blow it by believing in Daniel Jones? And
And
that'd be a justified decision.
and
I
and what
I feel
what
like
we
they
don't
they should get
know
their own guy.
what we don't know about all of that, Ty, what we don't know is what were the conversations in 2022, especially after they had a good year? What were the conversations between Joe Shane and John Mara? And did they have a conversation where Joe said, you know, maybe the smart thing to do here long term is to just move on right now, and cut the cord like we planned to. eh, and we don't know if John Mara said no. After this year we
Right.
had, this guy has to stay here. We don't know what that conversation was. We just know that John Mara has always or had always been a Daniel Jones supporter. And, we the feeling has always been that there was no choice,
Yeah.
but it would be nice, it would be interesting to know, to be a fly on the wall and know, what happened in those conversations, because that's the part of it that we don't know is in a lot of these decisions, even in the Saquon decision, what is the role? And we saw what we saw on Hard Knocks, but that doesn't mean we saw or we know everything. What did John Mara say off camera about Saquon Barkley? What did he really say about whether Daniel Jones was going to stay or go? So, I to me, that plays into whatever decision the Giants make too. John Mara's culpability in where the Giants are.
Mhm.
So,
And let's not forget, there's his brother in personnel. There's his nephew. There's a lot of ownership tentacles throughout the organization, for better or worse, and we've discussed
mhm,
all of that.
mhm,
You know what also should be mentioned though too is, and it's always hard to connect culture and a building, whether it's the front office, the coaching staff, and how does that kind of translate to wins and losses. But talking to a lot of those scouts that worked under the previous regime, and gosh, when I checked in with one of them for our One Giant Leap series in the summer, I had to pull up the quote. This is what it as a scout who's there for a long time. He said, I don't know Dave's heart, Dave Gettleman, that is. I don't know why he did what he did. I just wish I'd punched him right in the effing mouth. That's what I wish I'd done. So,
Wow.
it didn't take any prompting. I'm just saying, like, it was bad. It was really bad there before Joe Shane and Brian Dable got there. Just going to work was a miserable experience for a lot of people that were employed by the New York Giants because of Dave Gettleman. And they had to redo so much in
Right.
the scouting department, top to bottom. Now they've had 3 drafts. We could debate those for hours, right? Some good, some bad, and we could debate whether they should get a 4th. I'm just saying, like, the process itself, however you want to quantify it, it really did need a total overhaul, and that means something. I if you're John Mara, I mean, do you want to give that a chance to keep growing? I would think that would be a check in the retain Joe Shane, tally. But
Right.
at the same time, though, look, we can't ignore what we see on Sunday, Ed. Like, it's
Right.
bad. I mean, that
Yeah.
Ravens game was brutal. Like,
Yep.
it's the catch 22. Like, you want to be first overall or second overall. You don't want to, fall into the same, trap that you did last year, uh, and driving yourself out of range for not just Daniels but Drake May. But you got to show some fight. I mean, if the Raiders don't bungle that shotgun snap to Aiden O'Connell, I mean, they beat the back-to-back Super Bowl champs. Like, the Giants just haven't had one of those games where they're hanging with a heavyweight and showing that there's some fight here. I think that's what
Mhm.
ownership probably wants to see here down the stretch.
Yeah, we'll see. We got 3 games left. 3 games left of this misery before we find out. But as always, Ty, appreciate the time, appreciate the insight. Let folks know, where they can find your work if they don't already know. And by the way, folks, if you don't already know, why don't you know? So,
I appreciate it, man. Gosh, thank you so much. It's golongtd.com, also on Substack. Substack has a great app as well. It's just $8 a month or $50 for the year to get everything. Always just trying to cover football through that long form lens. And Giant fans have been great. I mean, I've tried to tap into those Giants as much as possible these last few years. It's a vibrant community, and I love hearing all opinions from all angles at all hours of the night, which is another story. But thank you everybody out there for reading, for subscribing, because it's a fascinating team, and this is going to be a massive decision for John Mara.
indeed it is.
Ish.
Indeed it is, Ty. So thank you very, very much. And Giants fans, thank you very, very much as always for watching. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.